The war in Sinai was never only a war in Sinai. While Egyptian soldiers dug into bridgeheads east of the Suez Canal, another crisis was burning far to the north, on the rocky heights above the Jordan Valley. Syria had attacked the Golan Heights at the same time Egypt crossed the canal, and for Israel, the first days of October 1973 were not a single emergency, but two emergencies pulling at the same national reserve. The canal front had shattered Israeli confidence in the south. The Syrian front threatened something even more immediate, a shorter road toward Israeli population centers, and a terrifying sense that the country might be squeezed at both ends. The pressure from Damascus would reach all the way back to Cairo, shaping decisions around the canal in ways that made the next phase of the war more dangerous. If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. The Golan Heights were very different from Sinai. Sinai was broad desert, a place where armored formations could maneuver across distance, if they found room and if supply could keep pace. The Golan was compact, elevated, broken by ridges, volcanic rock, narrow roads, and steep approaches. A tank battle there could feel less like a sweeping desert campaign and more like a fight through gates and corridors. Syrian forces came forward with large armored and mechanized formations, hoping to overwhelm Israeli defenders before reserves arrived. For Israel, the Golan's geography made every hour feel urgent. If the line cracked deeply enough, Syrian armor would not need to cross hundreds of miles of desert to create a national crisis. The front was close. The reserves were still gathering, and the shock of surprise was real. This northern pressure shaped the opening of the war because Israel could not treat the Egyptian crossing as the only problem. Every commander wanted more aircraft, more tanks, more attention, and more time, but the state had only one reserve system and one air force. In Sinai, Egyptian bridgeheads were growing stronger under the missile umbrella. On the Golan, Syrian armor had pressed hard against thin Israeli defenses and in places seemed close to a breakthrough. The high command had to make choices while both fronts screamed for help. A tank sent north could not be sent south. An air mission flown against Syrian columns could not at the same moment attack Egyptian bridges. The two-front war was not an abstract strategic phrase. It was a daily, hourly argument over survival.
For Egypt and Syria, the simultaneous attack had always been part of the logic of the war. Egypt alone could shock Israel, but Egypt and Syria together could stretch it. The plan did not require perfect unity of military purpose, because the two allies had different terrain, different immediate objectives, and different capacities. But it required enough coordination to prevent Israel from concentrating freely against one front at a time. In those first days, that coordination achieved something important. Israel had to fight while off balance. Mobilization was slower than the emergency demanded. Intelligence assumptions had failed, and commanders could not simply strip one sector to save another without risking disaster. The Syrian offensive helped make Operation Badr more secure by forcing Israel to divide its attention when Egypt's bridgeheads were most vulnerable.
Yet, alliance warfare is rarely neat, and the partnership between Cairo and Damascus carried tension from the beginning. Sadat's war was limited in concept. He wanted to cross the canal, seize ground east of it, and create the political shock needed to reopen diplomacy. Syria's position was more exposed. Hafez al-Assad, the Syrian president, wanted to regain the Golan Heights, and the geography of that front made the fighting feel all or nothing in a way Sinai did not. A limited Egyptian advance could still achieve Sadat's political purpose. A Syrian offensive that stalled short of its goals could leave Damascus facing Israeli counterattack on its own soil. This difference mattered. The two armies began the war together, but the meaning of success was not identical for both governments. As Israeli reserves reached the Golan, the northern battle began to change. Syrian armor had struck hard, and Israeli defenders had endured some of the most desperate fighting of the war, but the front did not collapse. Israeli tank crews, fighting from hold-down positions and using the terrain with skill, slowed and then helped reverse the Syrian push. Reinforcements arrived. Command and control steadied. The same Israeli qualities that had failed so painfully in the first rushed counterattacks near the canal found a different expression on the Golan, where the terrain and timing allowed smaller numbers to impose heavy costs. The Syrian advance lost momentum. Then Israel began to push back, and the pressure that Syria had applied to Israel started to reverse direction toward Damascus. This reversal changed the emotional weather of the war. For Egypt, the opening days had been a triumph of method and preparation. The canal had been crossed, the Bar-Lev line had fallen, and Israeli armor had been bloodied in counterattack. But in the north, Syria was now in trouble. Israeli forces not only recovered lost ground on the Golan, but pushed beyond the pre-war ceasefire line into Syrian territory. Suddenly, Damascus was no longer only a partner applying pressure, it was an ally under pressure, asking whether Egypt would do more to draw Israeli strength away. The war's center of gravity began to tug at Sadat's careful limits. The success of Operation Badr had depended on discipline and restraint. The crisis in Syria tempted Egypt toward a wider armored move. That temptation was dangerous because the Egyptian plan had been designed around the protective zone near the canal. The bridgeheads worked because infantry, artillery, engineers, tanks, and air defenses supported one another. Israeli counterattacks had suffered badly when they drove into that system, but a major push eastward across Sinai would be a different problem. Egyptian tanks would move away from the densest part of their air defense shield and into ground where Israeli armor could maneuver more freely. Supply lines would lengthen, coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and missiles would become harder. The same Egyptian army that looked strong near the canal could become vulnerable if it was pulled into the kind of mobile desert battle Israel understood best. Pressure from Damascus therefore threatened to make Egypt fight outside the design of its own success. There was also pressure from prestige and politics. Having stunned Israel and restored Arab confidence, Sadat could not easily appear indifferent while Syria suffered. The October War was fought by states, armies, and coalitions, but it was also fought before watching publics. Arab unity had been invoked before the war, and the simultaneous attack had created expectations that neither front would abandon the other. If Israel could turn north, defeat Syria, and then return south at its convenience, the political meaning of Egypt's early victory might be weakened. Sadat had to weigh the military wisdom of staying under the missile umbrella against the diplomatic and alliance cost of seeming passive. In war, the best tactical answer can become politically unbearable, and the politically necessary answer can become tactically ruinous. Inside the Egyptian command, this tension exposed a serious divide. Saad el-Shazli, Egypt's chief of staff, understood the original plan's logic and feared the consequences of moving beyond it. He knew that the army's opening success rested on combined arms balance, not on a sudden transformation into a force ready for deep armored exploitation across Sinai. Others, including political leaders and senior commanders closer to Sadat's strategic calculations, felt the need to relieve Syria and sustain the broader Arab war effort. The disagreement was not a simple quarrel between courage and caution. It was a clash between two kinds of responsibility. One responsibility was to preserve the army's hard-won bridgeheads. The other was to support an ally and keep the war's political momentum from turning against the coalition. For Israeli commanders in the south, the Syrian crisis and its aftermath created an opening they could sense before they could fully use. If Egypt remained close to the canal, Israeli options were limited and costly. If Egyptian armor moved eastward, the battlefield might change in Israel's favor. The Israeli army had been hurt, but it was not broken. Its tank crews, once better organized and properly positioned, could still fight with deadly effectiveness. Its commanders were beginning to understand that the Egyptian system was strongest when compact and weaker when stretched. A large Egyptian offensive out of the bridgeheads might give Israel what it had lacked in the first days: exposed armored formations moving into engagement areas, away from some of the infantry and air defense protection that had made the canal front so dangerous. This is why the coming date, the 14th of October, matters so much. It was not simply another day of fighting after the crossing. It was the moment when political pressure, alliance obligations, battlefield confidence, and operational misjudgment converged. Egypt's leaders faced a choice between preserving the limited war design that had worked and expanding the battle in response to a northern emergency. The decision to push armor eastward did not erase the brilliance of Operation Badr or the courage of the soldiers who crossed the canal. It showed how success can create its own trap. Once an army proves it can win one kind of battle, leaders may ask it to win a different kind before the conditions are ready. The desert is patient with no one, and it punishes the difference between what a force has achieved and what it is now ordered to attempt.
Pressure from Damascus therefore belongs in the center of this season because it connects the canal to the whole war. Without the Syrian front, Egypt might have had stronger reasons to remain in its bridgeheads and force Israel to solve the canal problem on Egyptian terms. With Syria under threat, the logic shifted. The two-front war that had protected Egypt in the opening days now helped pull Egypt toward risk. For armored warfare, the lesson is sharp and enduring. Tanks do not move only because terrain invites them or commanders desire it. They move because politics, alliances, fear, pride, and timing press on headquarters until movement seems necessary. The Egyptian armor that would advance on 14 October carried more than fuel and ammunition. It carried the weight of Damascus, and that weight would help deliver the operational initiative back into Israeli hands.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.